Shir Lamalot, Esayin El Ari, Me'ayin Yavo Ezri. Ezri Me'im Adonai, Osei Shamayim V'Oretz. Al Yitein Lamot Raglecha, Al Yanum Shomrecha. Hinei Lo Yanum V'Lo Yishan, Shomer Yisrael. Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Tzilcha, Al Yad Yeminecha. Yom HaShemesh Lo Yakeka, V'Yoreach Balayla. Adonai Yishmorcha Mikol Ra, Yishmor Et Nafshecha. Adonai Yishmor Tzitcha U'Vo'echa Me'ata V'Yad Olam.
We are gathered here to pay tribute to the memory of a very, very good friend of all of us. It's hard to be here. It's hard to stand up and talk about Moshe Mordechai ben Fishel Simcha. I knew the Fishel Simcha part. I wasn't sure about the Mordechai part, because Rabbi Shapiro always called him Moshe Mordechai. Yeah. His name before T was T-Baum. So if you really know how far back it goes, that's what he was called. And then, being how we are, we just felt T was enough. And T is enough. T was enough to fill a room, to fill our lives, to fill our hearts. And in so many ways, to be a very special person. He grew up as a chanich of Bnei Akiva, and his involvement with religious Zionism was part of the fiber of his being. He, for the Mizrachi movement in Chicago, I realized that he ticked every single leadership box. He was the Maskir Galil of Bnei Akiva. He was the Rosh Moshe. He was the chairman of the Camp Mosheva Committee, and he was the president of Mizrachi Religious Zionists of Chicago. There's very little it happened in Mizrachi in Chicago that he wasn't involved with. He was a constant, and he was always around. And he was never shy about sharing his opinion. What mattered most was that the opinions were always grounded in fact and in truth and in a deep love for religious Zionism, for Eretz Yisrael, for Medinat Yisrael, and especially for Klal Yisrael. I had the privilege of serving with him as Sgan Rosh Moshe in 1976. We worked closely, except on Shabbos afternoon when we both slept and Miriam took over because she was the camp secretary. She took over running the camp and we took off. He taught me how to do that. Working closely with him allowed me to get to know him a lot better, even though I knew him from Mary Crown and I knew him from the yeshiva. And I came to appreciate then his tremendous dedication, his sincerity, and his warmth, and in many ways, his unique personality. He could be sharp. At times, he could be acerbic, but he was never mean. The combination is rare. His honesty always came through with integrity and with some sensitivity. The last time I saw him in this building, and I've seen him many, many times in this building. The last time I saw him in this building was on Yom HaAtzmaut. So when I started at Mizrachi, I found out that there was this little minyan put together, a choose-up minyan, if you will, of people who would just come, mostly men, a few women, who would come every Yom HaAtzmaut in the morning and daven according to the nusach of Kibbutz Harati. Go look that up, what that means. But no one else did that in the city of Chicago but us here. And T was at the center of that. And he said, and I first asked him, I said, who takes care? He goes, I'll take care of it. He says, I'll handle everything. I'll open the doors and I'll everything. So I decided to come anyway, and I came every year since then, except when I was in Israel once. And I came and T was always here. So this last Yom HaAtzmaut, a number of the regulars were out of town. And we were scrambling to figure out if we're going to have a minyan or not. T said he would be here. And there were no women here. There were 9 guys. And we all looked at each other, and it was 6:30 in the morning. So in the past, sometimes we'd go, Baruch Hashem, there's a few shuls around. But at that particular moment, we couldn't find anybody. And I kept calling T. I said, T, you coming? Oh, yeah, I'm coming. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I'm right there. Okay. 20 minutes later, he pulls up. It was raining terribly. He had someone in the car with him who was helping. I think it was Shlomo over there. And T drove. And he got out of the car slowly. And I saw that his feet were completely bandaged. No shoes. He drove, totally bandaged feet. I said, are you nuts? Why? You didn't have to come. No. I have to come. You told me I'd be number 10. I have to be here. And it took him a few minutes to walk into the room, and he sat in the back and davened. And he did what he always does. He lives up to what's expected of him, to what he should be doing, and to what's right. And it didn't make a difference how he felt and the difficulties he had to go through. His dedication to the Mizrachi movement never wavered. He was also a member of the National Board of the Religious Zionists of America, and he was a delegate on the delegate list, on the candidate list for the World Zionist Congress. Not this last time, he wasn't up to going, but 10 years ago when we had it, 5 years ago before that, and it was by Zoom because it was during COVID, but 5 years before, T came anyway. He was just, I got to be there. He didn't make it to the delegate list. It does do the voting and so on, but he was there. And he would walk, and a little more difficulty than we would expect, but he'd be wherever he needed to be. He was conscientious. He was a highly respected mashgiach of the CRC, and he's going to be missed not only by his family and friends, but by the city of Chicago. Our kahila is definitely diminished because we're missing a letter of the alphabet. But what can you do? As we were planning this Azkara, and I want to thank Sam and Danny and Larry for helping with a lot of the details. As we were planning this Azkara, I knew there'd be people here, Baruch Hashem. I knew there'd be people from across the country and in Israel. Last time I checked a minute ago, it was 43. I'm sure it's a little bit more. And there are a lot of ways to do this. And we said the best way to do it is by Zoom. Because by Zoom, we're all together in a meeting, not a live stream, but we're all together in a meeting. If there's time at the end, we may just open this up after it's officially over, so we're not holding anybody here to do what T would say, I want to come up to the mic and say something. So if we have the time, which we probably will, we'll try to do that as well. But when we do things like that, Zoom, together, the one word that came to mind is this is what we would do. It's what T even taught me when we were in Mosheva together. It's to be chevrati, to be together. That's who we are. We're the friends of T. We are indeed and always will be chevrat T. That's who we are. And that's what we're doing here today. May his memory and his ideals and his example continue to strengthen us for years to come. We will now hear from Rabbi Leonard Matanky, Soretta Lazovsky, and via video, recorded from Riona Reese, who couldn't be here today, Rabbi Yaakov Dvorin, who I think might be on the Zoom, but he also gave us a recording, and then from Rabbi Aryeh Weiss, and possibly one other. We'll see how things work. Without any further ado, Rabbi Matanky.
It's very difficult to speak about Mark Tannenbaum of blessed memory because he was, as Jerry was talking, such a fixture in our community and in my own life. But because truthfully, he wasn't Mark Tannenbaum to me, he was T. And it's T who I know how to speak about because in so many ways, T was part of my life for so very long. I don't remember the first time I met him, which in and of itself says something. But in preparing for today, my guess is that I first met him when we lived on the third floor of my grandparents' building in Albany Park, above his classmate, one of his chevra, and my cousin, Steve Ehrenberg. But growing up in Bnei Akiva, T was ever present. He wasn't someone who entered my life at a certain point. He was simply present. steady, watching, guiding, correcting, and shaping. Of course, T was one of a kind, not only because he was known by that single letter of his name, but because there are people in this world who leave an impression on others. And then there are people who set a standard. And that's what T did. He set a standard. He demanded excellence, not for his own honor and not for control, well, maybe sometimes, but really because he believed deeply and sincerely that what we do reflects who we are, that standards are not about ego, they're about values. He seemed to notice everything, and he cared about everything. The exact wattage of the light bulbs in the Chadar Ochel, the size of the paper plates for Sudah Shlishit, 6 inches, by the way, no more and no less. How to mop a floor, figure eights, always figure eights. And these weren't idiosyncrasies. They were lessons that he was teaching us that values live in the details, that Kiddusham doesn't only appear in speeches or lofty ideals, it shows up in kitchens and in hallways, in how we prepare things for one another. During Shiva, I shared with T's children a story that captures this for me better than anything else. It's when Margaret and I were Chanichim and Avodah, and T was our Rosh Avodah. For one unforgettable week, or was it one traumatic week, I was the pot boy, which meant scrubbing the pots, not rinsing them, scrubbing them until they were absolutely spotless, which wasn't easy in the era before they invented Pam. Morning and afternoon, every day for a week, even after that dreaded meal of macaroni and cheese, when the pots felt like they would never forgive you. One day after lunch, I finally finished cleaning, and Harriet, the main cook, dismissed me to go to the pool for open swim. I was having a really great time when suddenly over the Ramkol came the announcement, Lenny Matanky report immediately back to the kitchen. I had no idea what I had done, and I'll be honest, I wasn't too thrilled about that announcement. But when I got back to the mitbach, there was T holding a pot that still had a little bit of schmutz on it. Now, I wasn't happy, but T was right. And in that moment, he wasn't really teaching me anything about pots. He was teaching me about life, that a job isn't done when you're tired, that a responsibility isn't complete when you feel like it should be. If something matters, you do it 100%. And until it's done right, you keep going. That lesson stayed with me long after the pots were put away, and I know I'm not alone, that many of us learned from T, whether it was from his davening, from his idealism, his sense of history, or even details. And it wasn't just his chanichim who benefited from his commitment. It was so many more, because T believed in community with his whole being. And as Rabbi Stuart Weiss spoke so beautifully at the funeral, T loved Israel with all of his heart. And after his family, it was Israel that he was devoted to in mind, spirit, and deed, more than anything else. Once you were part of T's world, he was fiercely loyal to his family, to his parents, his sister-in-law, Shalom, and brother-in-law, to his peers, and especially Shevet Moriah, to his colleagues, to Bnei Akiva, Camp Mosheva, Mizrachi, and even his students at Congregation Beth Shalom, where he taught for so many years. Of course, T wasn't a malach. None of us are. And he could be determined, which is a nice way of saying stubborn, but always with a goal in mind. And sometimes he could be a little over-historical, reminding everyone how things were done when Rabbi Shandeloff was director of Mosheva or the head of Kashrus at the CRC. But it was never for himself, always for others. That was T. He demanded excellence, but he believed in people. He gave responsibility and he expected you to rise to it. This past week, as I thought about T and about today, one figure from the Torah, from this week's parasha, kept coming to mind, and that was Yaakov Avinu's son, Yehuda. Yehuda was not the dreamer. He was not the firstborn, not the favorite. But when it mattered most, when his family was at risk, Vayigash elav Yehuda. Yehuda was the one to step forward. He was the defender of family. Not only his own children, but the larger family he belonged to. He was willing to challenge authority when values were at stake. And more than that, Yehuda didn't just speak. He took responsibility. He acted. He stepped forward. And that was T. He didn't just care, he did. He didn't just believe, he built. He didn't just speak, he showed up. Maskir Galil, running Bnei Akiva, Yoshev Rosh of the Vad Mosheva, which for those of us who remember was much more important than the camp committee. He strengthened the camp and he built a team. He was president of Mizrachi and he fortified the movement and its mission. And even he was that most talented Baal Tfilah who cherished davening, even if it went a little faster than the norm. Vayigash elav Yehuda, he moved, he acted, he achieved. And even in later years that were not easy, he remained unmistakably T. Schmoozing from his porch as we walked home from shul, coming to shul even when he needed to be pushed in a wheelchair, running his Pesach program with pride and purpose even when his strength was limited, driving hours to visit his children and grandchildren because they were his greatest nachas, traveling to Israel to see family, friends, because Israel was always part of his neshama. T was always on the move, moving others forward, anchoring us to our values, our traditions, and our sense of history. For Margaret and for me, T never stopped being our madrich, even as life changed and our positions and roles shifted. And to all of Chicago, what some now call old Chicago, T was a central figure. Not because he sought attention, but because he earned trust. The bottom line is that T taught us that communities don't sustain themselves, people do. That standards matter, that details matter, that showing up matters. And for this and so much more, we'll all be eternally grateful. To Ranan and Shira Eitan and Batya Miri and Ellie, and to his grandchildren, Theo, Ilan, Margot, and Ezra, our hearts go out to you. But know that your father and grandfather truly made a difference in the lives of so many. I pray that we will honor his memory by completing the work that we begin, by standing firm when values are tested, by caring enough to do things properly, even when no one is watching. May T's legacy, the legacy of Moshe Mordechai ben Fishel Simcha Zal, give us the strength to build, the courage to lead, and the devotion to serve with faith, to sustain us, responsibility to guide us, and love to bind us all together. May T's memory be for a blessing to Hei Nishmatot Tzura B'Tzura Chaim.
Before I call on Soretta, just for a moment, I want to acknowledge the presence here of Ranan and Miri, T's kids who flew in from Israel. Eitan is, I'm sure, joining us someplace on the internet. And also, I just want to, I was so impressed. I just have to point out the Franks, right? Who came in from Cleveland. And I said, what's your connection here? He says, we worked with him on the the Pesach program. And they drove him from class. I said, you could have Zoomed it. He goes, no, we couldn't. We had to be here. So that, between family and friends, this is what tea is all about. Soretta, please.
Good morning to those of you who are here, and good evening to those of you listening in from Israel. I am Soretta Allswing-Lazovsky, first cousin of Mark. Thank you, Rabbi Eisenberg, for asking me to speak as a representative of Mark's extended family. The story of Mark Tannenbaum did not begin on May 8th, 1953. The story of Mark Tannenbaum began when two families leaving the shores of Europe, many on our side of the family in approximately 1905, and the Tannenbaum family in 1921, made a conscious decision to stay steadfast in keeping the traditions and mitzvot of the Torah. This was not the norm at this time in America. Assimilation was rampant. But when Frank Tannenbaum and Zelda Allswing married, they began their family with Judaism and its mitzvot at its core. While I don't know that much about the Tannenbaum family, I know that their Pesach Seder started at the home of Bubby and Zadie Tannenbaum, where the entire family gathered. Younger and younger generations took over hosting the Seders over the years. While all family Seders are special, when I would hear the stories of the Tannenbaum Seders, I could feel the bonds of the relatives and the incredible memories that were being formed. While Mark had so many achievements, one of his crowning achievements was running Weekend Connections, which, to quote Mark's obituary, was creating a place where families could celebrate the holiday with meaning, joy, and community. And that meaning and joy that Mark grew up with as a Tannenbaum helped guide his way. Perhaps you could say that it was in his DNA. And who was always or almost always the first one to sign up to attend the Pesach program? None other than Mark's mother's sister, Adeline Katz, who many of you know as Auntie A. As soon as the mailing for the Pesach program would show up in her mailbox, Auntie A would send in her and Uncle Sal's registration. She was a most important relative in Mark's life and most likely his biggest cheerleader after his mother succumbed to cancer when he was 12. Relatives that I spoke to shared memories, including Mark's nephew, Mike Serlin, who said that Mark tried to make it to all simchas, often driving through the night. Relatives that I spoke to shared memories of Mark's incredible care of his father, Uncle Frank, during his last years. True Kibud Av. A relative that I spoke to said he was a cousin, always had a wonderful relationship with him, usually an upbeat, happy guy going back to Mosheva. For my early years, I knew Mark only as a cousin. For some years, I knew Mark as a person larger than life in Bnei Akiva and Mosheva, who happened to be my cousin. For the last years, I knew Mark as a cousin who was my friend, and that is when I had the closest relationship with him. I have learned to go to the Parsha for inspiration. I felt that I found this in the Parshiot about Yosef. Yosef had his life as a child, growing up part of the time in a two-parent family, and part of the time growing up with his father and siblings after the loss of his mother. Mark also grew up part of the time with his parents, and sadly, after the loss of his mother, living with his father and his sister Nancy. Then came the next part of Yosef's life. Through circumstances and then active decision-making and hard work, Yosef became a leader impacting the entire nation of Egypt and its surroundings. In the next part of Mark's life, through circumstances and then active decision-making and hard work, Mark, who began as a participant, then took on the role of leader and role model in Bnei Akiva, Camp Mosheva, and religious Zionists. On the Weiner side of the family, Mark came from a family steeped in the love of Israel and Hashem, a recipe for religious Zionism. More than 100 years ago in Chicago, this was not the norm by any stretch of the imagination. With the help of our cousin Chaim Brody, who is Mark's special friend, not just second cousin, I was able to read about the early days of the religious Zionist movement in Chicago. Among the documents Chaim sent me was an article titled Recollections of the Early Days of the Religious Zionist Movement in Chicago, written by Aviezer Patinkin. He wrote, about 50 years ago, a number of young people organized a group to be known as Ohavei Tzion Mizrachi. This organization was already in existence when Rabbi Meir Berlin Bar Ilan came to Chicago in 1916. He, as well as Rabbi Yehuda Leib Fishman Maimon, inspired these young, enthusiastic people with the ideals of religious Zionists and the desire to work for their realization. Amongst the 12 names that Mr. Patinkin listed were two of Mark and my great uncles, Dr. David Sachs, married to our great aunt Molly Weiner, and our great uncle, Mayor Weiner. They were pioneers who laid the groundwork with vision and leadership to form the different parts of Mizrachi and Chicago, which would include Bnei Akiva and Camp Mosheva. Many in that generation of our family and succeeding generations participated in the many activities within the Mizrachi framework and lived by these ideals. Mark started as a participant and then became a leader for decades and decades. Perhaps you can say that it was in his DNA. It is not up to me to thank people who've ever had great impacts on Mark's life. There are so many, and you know who you are. Thank you. I will mention just a few. Mark always mentioned a gentleman who took him by wheelchair to the Anshe Matala early Shabbos minyan, Howard Levin. Jody and Alan Gershman would take Mark to Shul for Mincha. Davening and minyan were so important to Mark. Thank you, Howard, Jody, and Alan. I will mention Sussy Stern, who gave Mark the ability to rehab with dignity and with lots of friends to help get him back to himself. I will mention Shiro Rothstein, who gave new meaning to the word friend and who was a rock for me during the last year. And I want to thank Theo, Elon, Margot, and Ezra for bringing out the emotional side of Mark, one that I was not used to seeing. He was always so proud of his children and his daughter-in-laws, and he would catch me up on what they were up to, but his grandchildren took him to a different level. It was truly beautiful to listen to Mark and talk about them. Mark was a proud father and grandfather and a proud religious Zionist. He enabled generations of Chicagoans to make Pesach memories at his Pesach resort, which symbolized the importance of transmitting the Masorah of Torah and mitzvot to the future generations, as his relatives had done in previous generations when they came to America and adhered to their traditions. May Mark's legacy carry on to the future generations as well. A life short in years, but large in accomplishments. We miss you, Mark.
It's an honor to say a few words in memory of Moshe Mordechai ben official Simcha, Mark Tannenbaum, Zichrono Livracha, whom we affectionately knew as T, of course. And I have to say that I didn't have the zchus of knowing him for most of his life, but after my wife and I moved to Chicago 12 and a half years ago, he was one of the people that I would encounter on my way to Shul. He'd usually be on his way back from another minyan, and he always had a cheerful, jovial countenance to him. There was always a smile and a laughter in his voice and in his step. He always had a humorous and witty comment to make, and we bonded over time until he eventually asked me to become the scholar in residence of his famous and fabled Pesach program in the Grand Geneva in Wisconsin, Weekend Connections. And I had been preceded in that regard by Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz, Zechat Tzadik Livracha. And I remember Rabbi Schwartz telling me how much he enjoyed being on that program, that he was put to work. He had to give a lot of drashas, a lot of shiurim, but it was very gishmak. It was very nice that even after Rav Schwartz got sick, T would bring Rav Schwartz back and make accommodations, and there were very significant accommodations that had to be made for Rav Schwartz at that point in time, given his physical condition after his stroke. And T felt that this was something that was important to invest in. And this program was never really about making money for T. It was just about being able to make everyone's yontiv more enjoyable and more meaningful, and that made him very happy. And when I started joining the program, I also gave a lot of shiurim. I think I counted this past Pesach that I gave a total of 20 shiurim. I gave a shiur every single day of the yontiv, and I gave a daf yomi shiur, and I gave a drasha every single day of Shabbos and yontiv. But he was never a taskmaster. He was very accommodating, even in terms of accommodating my children. One of my sons, after he got married, he even provided for him to come, I think, the last days of the yontiv together with his wife as what he called a wedding present. he was very magnanimous towards us, and we were very appreciative. The name Moshe Mordechai for me stands for the Moshe was just as Moshe Rabbeinu was a leadership figure, and he brought the Jewish people to Eretz Yisrael. T was somebody who had a great yearning for Eretz Yisrael, and he was a leadership figure who inspired so many, including within his own family, to make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, and I think that's a great suchus for him. In terms of the Mordechai, so Mordechai inspired Esther for Leich Kenosis Kol Yehudim to bring everyone together. He was somebody who brought together lots of people for the Pesach program. So when he was leading Camp Moshava, and in all of his other activities for Mizrachi and other programs, he was somebody who brought people together for the purpose of Torah, for the purpose of mitzvahs, for the purpose of furthering their love for Eretz Yisrael. So he was very much that type of a figure, personifying his name, Moshe Mordechai. And even the nickname T, the T for me stood for Torah. That in the programs, sure, the Gashmias was important to make sure that the food was good quality, but equally important was to make sure that the hashgacha was proper and was the top of most hashgacha you can get, CRC, you can't do better than that, obviously, and that there be high-level Torah contents in the program. My boys wanted a room set aside for a base medrash. This past year, he set aside a room serving as the base medrash, and there were always fathers and sons learning together in that room. It was a very beautiful thing to him. That was, the Torah was of paramount importance, and the T stood for truth, that he was uncompromising, that things had to be done properly, things should be done promptly, and he stood for that and inspired other people to be truthful and to be exact in terms of fulfilling their responsibilities. And the T stood for tenacity, that this past year, people didn't necessarily know if he'd be able to cobble together the program. He already wasn't feeling so well or doing so well, but he was tenacious, and he made sure that the program would happen and put all of the pieces in place, and it was really a very, very beautiful program. So we can really learn from all of these wonderful qualities that he possessed and that he bequeathed to us, that we benefited tremendously from him. We were very inspired by him, and we should follow in that example of truth and tenacity, and above all else, Torah, and living our lives according to Torah principles, having great love for Klal Yisrael and for Eretz Yisrael. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Hi, this is Yaakov Devorin speaking. To T, I was Moose, and in my Mosheva days and Mosheva experience, it was only Moose, and I hear his voice calling me or telling me something, always prefacing Moose, Moose, and always something that would amuse him, which was a big part of his life, that which amused him or he found interesting and wanted to pass along. I find it impossible to believe that T is not here, even though in the hesped that was given by his son Renan said something along the lines that it's both easy and hard to believe that T's not here. The easy part, because there was the dry run, in Renan's words, back in May, where Hashem had called him to Shamayim, but the doctors brought him back a couple times. And we had that dry run from May until now. But more than anything, it's impossible to believe. T was always there. He was bigger in life. He was that person whose presence was there in the restaurants, in the grocery store, and he made his presence known, of course, and he loved doing that. He was a people person. He loved interacting with people, and you knew if he was around because he made his presence known. More than anything, though, he was an ish yashar. He was as straight as an arrow. Stuart Weiss mentioned in his hesped that T did not have a bad bone in his body, which is true. Everything, the right thing, the ethical thing, and the proper thing to do, from even calling the different publishing houses to make certain that he knew what fee he should pay if he was photocopying pages from a Sidur that he was using for his Pesach program, because it was the right thing to do with copyright laws to make certain that he paid a proper fee. He had his thoughts, he had his opinions. T was a very opinionated person, and I think because of that, sometimes people didn't understand him, that he had a way of doing things and he was not necessarily subject to change. He knew how things were done back in Mosheva 1973. He would tell you about it. He would remind you of the different incidents, episodes, things that he enjoyed, things that were not enjoyable, but his memory for the different events was something that was incredible. He was a good guy, a real good guy, and wanted to do the right thing in every circumstance and be helpful where he could be. I remember one time at Congregation Ezra's Israel, before the Kiddush was being completed, that the janitor was setting up, and there was a table where the janitor was putting out a tablecloth and was trying to do it by himself. T got up and went over to the other side and put out the second side of the tablecloth and just said in general, yeah, this is impossible to do by yourself. No one asked him, but he saw the janitor struggling with it, and it was just the right thing to do, to go to the other side. More than that, he was a real friend. The people who are part of his chevra from Shevet Moriah know exactly what I'm talking about, probably better than anyone. And his friends were the most devoted part, I think, that had a special place in T's heart. His friends were most important to him, and they realized what a good guy he was. There's nothing he wouldn't do for others, for his friends. I remember one time, this is back around 1982 or so, Stuart Weiss said to T, very nonchalantly, just in a casual way, you know, T, next week I may need you to drive to Dallas for me. And T said, okay, just let me know what day. His friend was asking him to drive from Skokie to Dallas, and T only needed to know what day that he needed to do this. This was the kind of guy he was. He would do anything for anyone. I mentioned about his memory for incidents, for events, for Mosheva, B'nai Akiva, the different things that were important to him. Israel was bigger than anything in his life. He wanted to live in Israel, and Stuart Weiss mentioned that also in his hesped, that unfortunately he's only there in the next world, not the way he would have liked. T's memory for things was incredible. He knew everyone's license plate, and he'd let you know that he saw you in the Jewel, or he saw you at Hungarian, or you were in such restaurant because he knew your license plate. He was an unbelievable host for Shabbos Kiddush. He insisted on having anyone who was nearby, someone walking by his house, someone who davened with him at the Matala early davening on Shabbos morning, to come back. The first week that I davened with him decades ago at Matala at the early minyan, I went to his house, and he was the incredible ultimate epitome of a good host. I didn't go back the second week because I thought he was taking advantage. I found out from him he was insulted. He was offended. He said, no, aren't you going to come back? It gave him pleasure. He had such pleasure, and I never skipped. I never missed another time after that. More than being a host for Kiddush was Shalshudas. He enjoyed immensely Shalshudas in summertime in his backyard. He would set up the same way he would for Kiddush, only outside in the backyard, and he made sure that the things you enjoyed, if he knew you liked cream herring, he made sure to have a bottle of cream herring on hand. If he knew that you liked a certain kind of whiskey, he had that on hand. He knows you like this kind, he had that for you. And he enjoyed singing Zmiros. Anyone who knows him knows he loved benching out loud, and that was something important to him. But singing Shabbos Zmiros and singing songs from his earlier recollections of Mosheva days, we did that in his backyard. We did it loudly, and he loved when the neighbors would stop in and tell him how much they enjoyed hearing it. He was just a good guy, and I'm repeating because I can't believe that he's not here. And I have to believe that there in Shamayim, he's going to look down at us, and only now will he really know how much he was beloved by everybody, because I'm not certain he had any idea when he was Olam Hazeh how much really he made an impression on people, and what incredible impact he had on others. I know I will miss him forever. He was a friend in the most loyal, dedicated, devoted way. And may his neshama have aliyah and shamayim, and we'll always remember him in the best possible way. Rest in peace, T. We miss you, and I personally miss you forever.
Of course, it is I'm the one who's very important to eulogize, to give a hesped for Moshe Mordechai for T. On the other hand, it's very, very difficult. I did so many things in my life together with T. I'll just two major junctions that we were together. One was in Hachshara. We spent together in Kibbutz Ein Hatziv the whole year, and I learned a lot from T during that year. And we spent a year together, approximately a year together on Kibbutz Male Gilboa. I would like to start my hesped with a few words from the Shulchan Aruch in Tchilat Yeridea, Siman Shin Mem Dalet Shin Dalet Nen. Feel the hesped, the obligation to eulogize. Mitzvah gedolah mahaspid al hamet k'ra'ui. It's very, very important. It's a major mitzvah to eulogize on the dead. K'ra'ui. It has to be fitting for the person. U'mitzvato laskir shibcho. And it's very, very important. It's part of the mitzvah is to praise the person who has passed away, the person who is being eulogized. Vasur, the Shulchan Aruch adds, Vasur la'aflig b'shibcho yoter midai. It's forbidden to exaggerate too much when you are too much of his praises when you are eulogizing the person who has passed away. Ella mazkirin mitot tovot shebo. When you eulogize, you should mention those good qualities that he had. To add on to them a little bit. Rak shelo yaflig. It's important not to exaggerate. So, of course, the Taz, the other commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch ask why the Shulchan Aruch says you should exaggerate a little bit, just not too much. But isn't exaggerating not telling the truth? So the Taz explains, and other commentaries also explain, the Torah Zahav and other commentaries explain, that when we eulogize, we are eulogizing the neshama, the soul. The neshama is expressed through the person's actions, through his speech, through his thoughts, but the actions of a person and the speech of a person and even his thoughts are only a small part of the goodness and the divine light that is found inside of him as neshama. Therefore, what we see outside is only a small portion of the goodness that is in that person. To go back to my very dear and missed friend, Moshe Mordechai, what we saw outside was only a small portion of the great light that was inside of him, the great goodness that was inside of him. I want to, on a similar point, I want to mention when Moshe Mordechai, when Moshe Rabbeinu approaches the burning bush, the sneh, Vayar Hashem Kisar Lirot. God saw that Moshe Rabbeinu approached to see why the bush was in flames but not burning. And God called to him from within the bush. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe, and God said, Moshe, Moshe, Hineni. Vayomer. Now this is the pasuk that I want especially. Vayomer, Al tikrav halom. Do not come any closer. Shal nalecha di al raglecha. Remove your shoes from your feet. Why does God tell Moshe Rabbeinu to remove his shoes from his feet? It's true, the Kohanim and the Beit Mikdash also went without shoes. But again, why? One explanation is found in the Malbim on this pasuk. The Malbim says as follows. Hodialo, God informed Moshe, Shekefishu ata, as he is now, lo yuchal karev lamadriga hazot, he cannot approach the higher level of prophecy, the highest level of prophecy. Ad shisal nalav me'alagav, until he removes his shoes from his feet. The Malbim explains, what does that mean? L'ferusha davar. The explanation of this is, shehagviyah nikret b'shem now, she'al raglei haneshama ruchamit. The body is called by the name of a shoe, which is on the feet of the neshama, the spiritual aspect of the person. What we saw, what we met externally with Moshe Mordechai, with T, was only the cloak, the external covering of a very, very large and very, very godly neshama. And as I mentioned before, the past few years, I didn't get to see him that often because I'm here at Arba, and he was unfortunately in Chicago. But whenever we were together in the years that we did spend together, one of the things that was so obvious, at least to me in Mark, Tannenbaum, and T, was with all of his practicalities, what drove him was something very, very ideal, something from within him, a divine light which he was trying to achieve and to bring into this world. I could go on and on about how I saw this divine light in many, many different ways. His willingness to help other people, his willingness to do things that other people couldn't do or didn't want to do. Even when he found himself in very, very not pleasant or not comfortable circumstances, that never slowed him down from wanting to help other people. If we could only learn a little bit from Moshe Mordechai, and just as an aside, the two names are both names of leaders of the Jewish people, national leaders. Very, very special national leaders who did not have the zchut of living in Eretz Yisrael in the end. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted more than anything, at least to see the land that God gave him that right. And Mordechai HaYehudi ended up in Persia. Mordechai Tannenbaum is now here in Eretz Yisrael. And all of his light we should take, and all of the goodness that he brought, his nationalism, his Zionism, his love of the Torah, his yuk and mitzvot, all of this we should take into our hearts and try and continue his light in this world.
It's hard for me to speak in Zoom without seeing the people in front of me, but I will take the opportunity to eulogize and to talk about my very, very, very close and dear friend of many, many years, T. And I want to direct this eulogy, this hesped, to Renan, to Eitan, to Miri, so that you have something, so many thoughts that you can remember and think about your dad that will keep you going for the years to come. Also speaking after Rav Aryeh, after Ike, is a big kavod for me, and in general for me to speak in this, for this hesped. I want to thank Jerry Eisenberg for turning to me, and I hope that I will be able to add different aspects about T's life for you, for the kids, and for everybody who are listening. T came into our life in fourth grade. We were in Ari Crown, and this new kid came to our class in fourth grade, named Mark Tannenbaum. We became friendly in fourth grade, but nothing that much, nothing that great. I don't really remember anything from that year. But in fifth grade, I do remember a few things. In fifth grade, two things happened. Number one, on Sunday, about 3 or 4 times on Sunday afternoon during the year, myself, T, of course, then it was Mark, T, and Izzy Eichenstein. We went to our teacher's house, Mrs. Kushner in Skokie, which was miles and miles away in those days. And we spent the afternoon with her and her husband and her child. And that was a great experience for all of us. The second experience that we had together was that I had a crush on Phyllis Ziskin, Zichrona Livracha. And then T came into the picture, and he began to walk her home, while I thought I had the monopoly of walking her home. And he got in there, and of course he lived in Albany Park across from Mary Crown, so it was much easier for him. For me, it meant walking her home, coming back to Kimball, and taking a bus home to West Rogers Park. But one day, he walked her home, and he came to me the next day and he said, Renan, I wasn't Cole in those days. He said, Renan, I just want you to know, I not only did I walk Phyllis home, but I carried her books for her. And then I knew that I had real stiff competition from T. In sixth grade, two things happened. One was that we played baseball all the time in the North Park College parking lot adjacent to Ari Crown. And that year, T's mother, your grandmother, passed away. And I remember after playing ball from 4 to 5, we went over to the house to be Nichum Avelim. And we came in, and of course, I put my foot in my mouth and I said, Mark, you don't know what you missed. We had such a great game today. And of course, that was not the most appropriate thing to say, but as a sixth grader, I was able to get by it with minimum problems. But the thing that really made an impression, I think this is when I really realized what kind of person T was. That year, Litzarenu, Sam Selesky's father had also passed away. And both T and Sam, and this made an impression upon me that has remained with me all my life. T and Sam went every single day for Mincha Ma'ariv to the Shtibel, to Rabbi Eichenstein's Shtibel, across the street from Ari Crown, to daven, to say Kaddish. And I said, that is really amazing how these 11-year-old kids took upon themselves the mission of going to and to say Kaddish every single day and to make Mincha Ma'ariv every single day. And that remained with me all my life. I remember telling that to Sam just after T passed away, after your father passed away. I talked to Sam and I said, Sam, this is something that I'll never forget, how you and T went every single day for Mincha Ma'ariv. So we finished grammar school. We went to the Skokie Yeshiva. We went to the Yeshiva high school. We bummed around a lot. I can't say that either of us were the biggest masmidim in the yeshiva, but we enjoyed our yeshiva years. We made a lot of friends. Our circles were coincided very much. We had our B'nai Akiva circle. We had our yeshiva circle. We had the guys who were older than us and the guys who were younger than us. And we really had a very good social life. One of the things which I remember about T in those days was that he used to come when we were juniors and seniors. He used to come a lot of times with his father's car, with your grandfather's car, Mr. T, with Mr. T's car. And instead of eating lunch in the Skokie Yeshiva, we would pack into the car and drive down back to West Rogers Park to Reb's and buy a hamburger or a hot dog or a Polish sausage and eat there and come back for our English classes. We were together in B'nai Akiva. T was a madrich in the SNF in Albany Park, and I was a madrich in West Rogers Park. And we went to Moshavad together, Machaneh Avodah. And one of the things I want to tell you in Machaneh Avodah, we have 3 Ohalim. We had 2 madrichim, Yaakov Tzvi and Richie Pekot. So they were in 2 Ohalim, and each one in a different Ohel. And in our Ohel, we didn't have a madrich. And I remember overhearing one of the Yaakov Tzvi saying, well, in that tent, they don't need a madrich because they have T. His responsibility, he was there, and they knew that we had to get up at 6:30 in the morning. T made sure that everybody was up, and T made sure that we cleaned the oil for Shabbat. We had our own madrich, and that was the responsibility. He always had responsibility. After high school, we went on Hachsharat. He was on Ein Natsev. I was on Kfutzat Yavne. In those days, there were no cell phones, there were no WhatsApp. So our kesher, we always had kesher, but we didn't see each other for a long time. We came back to Chicago. T immediately became the maskir of Bnei Akiva. We were both involved, very actively involved in Bnei Akiva. Then afterwards, in the summer, being madrichim, tafkidim, different tafkidim in Mosheva. T was the Yoshev Rosh of the Vad Mosheva, and he ran Bnei Akiva and ran Camp Mosheva from the side of Bnei Akiva with an iron fist. He ran it and he organized it, and things were turning with it was a very highly oiled machine. Things were really working well, and we continued in these jobs, in these tafkidim and Mosheva and Bnei Akiva. And, in 1978, Barbara, Zichronah Livracha, and myself, we made Aliyah. T came a couple months later. We spent a year or two together in Mali Gilboa, then T went back to Chicago. And what's interesting is, even though we've basically been 45 years in different places, far apart in the world, our relationship and our kesher remained. I would come back for visits to Chicago, and I would go with T. Shabbat morning, we had a ritual. I would go with your dad to the 7 o'clock Matala Minyan. 8:15 it was over. It was not at 8:16, but 8:15 it was over. And we came back for Kiddush, like Moose said. We came back for Kiddush in your house. And after Kiddush, I would go then to Beis Yitzchak to hear my brother Zevi Lane, and from there I would go to Kins to be with Barbara's parents and meet people who are in Kins. So that's basically how we kept our years together. And I want to right now talk more about T specifically, and that is I'm going to take his name, Moshe Mordechai, and take from each letter of the two names and tie a certain attribute about him from these letters. So Moshe, Mem. T was a mensch. Okay, let's come out and say T was not just a great guy, but to be a mensch is more than just being a good guy. It means being able to handle delicate situations in the best possible way. So he had told me a few times when he was a chairman of the Mosheva committee, or when he was the president of Apom Mizrachi, when he had different issues that he had to deal with, and they were sometimes difficult to deal with them. He said, I tried to deal with them in the most delicate way, because these are people in the community, and I didn't want to do anything that might embarrass them or take away from their respect and honor. And it was very important for him to handle people and to do these things in the most fine and menschlichkeit way. Mem. Shin, Moshe, Shin, Shira. T loved to sing. Not only did he love to sing, he was also a great chazan. He learned from a tape. I think he either got it from Yaakov Tzvi Lidoff or from Rabbi Lidoff, a tape of the Nusach for Yamin Noraim, and from that tape he was chazan for the Yamin Noraim for many, many years. And he was a chazan in the Bnei Akiva minyan. And another thing is that Moose mentioned Shiva Moriah. We used to sit for hours on Friday nights or Motzei Shabbat or after Tochniot. We used to sit. And one time we were at Simi's house in the basement. We must have been in 11th or 12th grade. And, things were quiet down there. And Mrs. Rother didn't know, these are high school kids. I want to make sure that nothing's going on there. There shouldn't be going on. So she opened the door and she heard us singing Shirei Kodesh and Shirei Eretz Yisrael. And she said, there's nothing to worry about with this group of kids. And one of the people who were the most involved in the Shirah, and when he was involved in the Shirah, we were all singing, and that was T. And he always made sure that I didn't sit next to him because I was off tune, and that bothered him that I sang off tune. That's the hey. That's the shin. Hey. This now we're going to go to English a little bit. Honesty. Okay, we have mentioned how T was such an honest person. He was yashar. Echad bapeh, echad balev. What he felt is what he said. And he would get into disagreements with people, and he would tell things as he saw them, and it wasn't always comfortable to listen to what he had to say. But let me just tell you, one of the great qualities that he had was that even though he could be in a very heated argument with you, when the argument was over, you were good friends again. He didn't hold any grudges with any of these arguments. And that was a tremendous, tremendous quality. Okay, Mordechai, the second mem, Manhigut. T was a leader. T was the leader of our Bnei Akiva Shevet. He was the force behind our Bnei Akiva Shevet. He was the leader of Bnei Akiva. He was maskir for 2 years. And then when he finished being maskir, his cousin Chaim took over being the maskir of Bnei Akiva. And he led Bnei Akiva, and he led Mosheva, and he led every job that he had, every tafkid that he led with leadership. He had tremendous, tremendous leadership. The next letter, Resh, responsibility. T was responsible. Every job that he took upon himself, every tafkid that he took upon himself. And this goes back to the idea of saying Kaddish every day. He was responsible. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to do something. He took it upon himself, and you knew that you could count on T. Whether it would be tafkidim, whether it could be like Moose said, for the chevra, if you needed something, you knew that T was responsible. He was always there to pick up the slack if you needed. Another story that I want to tell you is that T, he every Friday set up the cheers for the Apol Mizrachi adult minyan, which was upstairs in the old Lishka and Foster. Every Friday, he took care of it. And if he wasn't there for a Shabbat or whatever, he made sure that somebody else did it. And it was always done in perfect fashion. Dalid, Mordechai, Dalid. Dedication. T was dedicated. He was dedicated ad sof to everything that he had done. For everything, like I mentioned, responsibility, dedication, everything goes together. His dedication to, whether it be to his family, to his friends, to Bnei Akiva, to Mosheva, to Apol Mizrachi, was ein sofit. To his family, that's for sure. We know that he was a very, very, very good father. But to his friends, he was always so dedicated. If he came into Chicago, somebody traveled, needed a ride to the airport or back, you know that T you could always turn to. He was dedicated to everybody. The chaf. And this, you got to sit tight. I got 3 things for chaf. One was charisma. T had charisma. He walked into a room, and when he was in that room, everybody knew he was there. It could be because of his booming voice. It could be because of the stories that he told. It could be because of the singing that he told. And it could also be because of the arguments that he might have. But T was there, and you knew that he was there. And you knew he was there in a good manner. Okay? The second one is chinuch. Mordechai. It's a chaf, but chet. Chinuch. Everything was chinuch. He used to say to me when I was Rosh Moshe, make sure that every program, every night Tuchnid and Mosheva is tied into the subject, the nosei of the camp. And he said, Bnei Akiva is not just an organization. It's not just an organization. It's a tenuah that educates towards Torah, v'avodah, chalut, siyut, v'hakshama. And this was T. This is the direction that we have to take. Chinuch, and he dedicated 30 years as a Talmud Torah teacher in order to give Yiddishkeit over to these kids who were in his classes over the years. And the third chet, or chaf, is chevrati. T was one of the most chevrati people that I know. I just wanted to tell you about him. I learned so much from him. It was just amazing how he could come into a room, not necessarily know these people, and strike up a conversation and immediately become very good friends with the people, and to tell them stories and to the kabbalah, the sever panim yafot. People were accepted very, very quickly into our group and into his friends. People he would bring over for kiddush because T met them and brought them over, and they always felt so comfortable by him. Okay, T was a super chevrati person. And the last letter, Yud, Yirat Shamayim. T had Yirat Shamayim. It followed him with everything he did. He wasn't one of the biggest Talmidei Chachamim in our chevra, but he was dedicated to Yirat Shamayim. He was dedicated to Beit Knesset. To him, Beit Knesset was his Mikdash Ma'at. And he ran the tefillot wherever we went, whether it was in Moshava or Bnei Akiva, Yamim Noraim, in the Matala minyan, in the Heshi minyan for Yamim Noraim. He ran the minyan. He was the Gabbai, and you saw that he didn't just do it because he wanted things to run smoothly. He ran it because he had Yirat Shamayim, because tefillah and organizing the Beit Knesset was important for him, and it was something that brought him closer to Hashem. I want to end. I don't want to take too much more time. I just want to say that to Renan, to Eitan, and to Miri, that T was a very, very, very dear friend of mine. And I talked just this week to Chaim, and I talked yesterday to Ike. And through the conversations that we had, T's name came up time after time after time because he was part of us. Even when we heard that T passed away, I said, T hu basar mi b'sarenu. He's part of us. He's part of us. We grew up together. We were molded from the same. We were together. We were not just he and I. All of us, all of Sheva Moriah. We were part of the same branch. We were all part of the same makeup and the same framework. T is missed already by me very dearly, and I hope that you have many, many wonderful memories of your father, and that it should stay with you for many, 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 many years. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
El Malei Rachamim Shocheina Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'malos Kedoshim Utorim Kezoar Harakia Mazhirim Es Nishmas Moshe Mordechai Ben Fishel Simcha Shalach Leolamo בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמתו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח ושלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
Mishaberach Avosenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Yuvorech es Chayalei Tzva Haganol Yisrael v'Anshei Kochos HaBitachon Omdim al Mishmar Etzenu v'Yarei Eloheinu Migvul al Levanon v'ad Midbar Mitzrayim u'min Hayom HaGadol ad Levo HaRava v'Yabasha ba'aviru v'Hayam Yitein Adonai es Oyavenu hakamim aleinu nigafim lifnehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor v'Yatzil mikol tzara v'tzukah mikol nego u'machala v'Yishlach bracha v'asacha b'chol ma'aseh yedehem Yad ber sonenu tachtehem v'yatreim b'chesed Yeshua v'ateres nitzachon v'kuyam b'hem hakasuv ki Adonai Elohechem haholech imachem lilachem lachem imo yevechem l'hoshia eschem v'nomar amen. Avinu sheba shamayim tzur Yisrael v'goalo bareches medinas Yisrael reishis semichas kulasenu hagen olel bevras chastecha ufros olel sukat shlomecha ushalach orachav amitecha l'roshel sarel v'yoatzel v'sakaneim be'etzat tova milfanecha chazekes yedei megine eretz kodshenu V'anchilem Eloheinu Yeshua v'ateres nitzachon ta'atreim v'nasata shalom ba'aretz v'simchas olam liyoshvea. V'yasachenu kol beis Yisrael pekadna b'chol artzos bezureihem v'solichem mehira koma mius l'tzioni recha v'Yerushalayim mishkan shemecha. Kakasu b'saras Moshe avdecha im yiyadin chacha b'ktzei hashamayim misham yikabetzecha Adonai Elohecha misham yikachecha v'vi'acha la'aretz asher yorshu avosecha v'rishta. Yached levavenu li'aval li'raz shemecha v'lishmor es kol divrei sorosecha. Hofa b'hadar ga'onu zecha al kol yoshevei sevel artzecha v'yomar kol asher neshama v'yapo Adonai Elohei Yisrael melech u'malchuso b'kol mashala amen selah. Please be seated for just another moment. Before we conclude, I wanted to point out that the family and Mizrachi have felt that a good way to pay tribute to our friend T is to establish a fund. We're calling it the T Fund, Mark Tannenbaum Zichrono Livracha Memorial Fund, which will be used to support activities and programs in Mizrachi, in B'nai Akiva, and hopefully there's enough scholarships and support for activities at Camp Mosheva. Those three things which were so important to him. There's a QR code on the back, the tfund.rzc.us, or feel free to just contact me if you'd like to donate. Before we finish, T's cousin, yeah, you would come up to say a few words?
Yeah, I'm Chuck Tzvi Tannenbaum, Mark's first cousin. I'm so glad that this event occurred. I know these, I heard so many wonderful anecdotes, and I would get together with Mark often for meals up here and just to schmooze, talk about personal lives, talk about his children. I knew these institutions were very important to him, but I just had no idea how involved he was in leadership positions. And I don't know if my other cousins did, but this is just, it's so meaningful to hear these things about him. So Kol HaKavod for putting this together and enlightening us about Mark, or T. One other thing I had some things that were coming to my mind and forgot most of them, but there was one thing that, because I recalled someone mentioned how a friend of his asked for a lift to Dallas from Chicago, and he, what day should I be ready to go? So I have a story, a little quick story though. So I'm a dentist, and T did something for me, I think, that actually took on a little more risk than this trip to Dallas, because as I graduated dental school, we have to take these boards, and we would have to have people come in and be patients in the clinic, and have people. I mean, we have we have 2 years of clinical training before we take these boards, and I asked Mark if he would come and be my patient, and he sat through it and helped me get my license. So it definitely was a risky undertaking for him. But again, I'm so happy that this was put together, and we'll all miss Mark, and may his memory be a blessing. Yeah.
Just before we conclude, Renan wanted to say a few things.
Morning, everybody. We flew in from New York, so please don't think that we came all the way from Israel. And Eitan's on the Zoom. I don't have any remarks prepared. I just wanted to take a moment and thank everyone for coming, both here live and on the Zoom. Particularly, I wanted to thank Rabbi Eisenberg and Sam and all the people who put this together. We, the siblings, we don't take it for granted how much our dad meant, and we just wanted to take a chance to thank you for the opportunity. When you brought it up at Shiva and you said the Chevra would like to do something, oh my God, okay, we gotta keep dragging this out, but it's such a nice thing. And I didn't realize how many rabbis would want to speak at this. I think everyone except for Soretta, who of course is married to a rabbi, is a rabbi who spoke. So I think it perfectly encapsulated our father, and we just wanted to take a chance to thank you all for coming and for the time and for the organizing of this. So thank you.